Grace, mercy, and peace belong to you. They are free gifts from the one who was and is to come. Amen. The late Kurt Vonnegut, a fellow Hoosier best known for his satirical novel Slaughterhouse-Five, once had this to say about the Beatitudes, the subject of this morning's gospel reading from St. Matthew. I'm quoting from Vonnegut now. For some reason, the most vocal Christians among us never mention the Beatitudes. But often, with tears in their eyes, they demand that the Ten Commandments be posted in public buildings. And of course, that's Moses, not Jesus. I haven't heard one of them demand that the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, be posted anywhere. Blessed are the merciful in a courtroom. Blessed are the peacemakers in the Pentagon. Give me a break. If it's not obvious, Vonnegut was criticizing our inherent American disposition for rules and lists of do's and don'ts, preferring rules over the more subtle qualities of humility and forgiveness, which Jesus taught to his disciples. Most of us have a tendency to regard the Sermon on the Mount as a to-do list for our entrance exam into heaven. And most of us will conclude, if you haven't already, like Sigmund Freud did, that such a mission and effort is, well, it's just impossible. But such a view would miss entirely the point that Jesus was trying to make. For our response to the Beatitudes can depend on where we're situated in life. Some of the blessings may be intended as a reward for virtuous behavior, while others indicate a reversal of fortune for the poor or the downtrodden, which can be another way of saying, just hang in there because your turn is coming. But the significance we so often miss is that we all have our feet firmly planted in both worlds, providing blessing and receiving blessing. Those who seek to show mercy, for instance, will one day experience a need for mercy themselves. That sign that I showed the kids over the narthex door says, blessed to be a blessing, meaning as you bestow blessings on someone, know that one day you might be on the receiving end yourself. It's what that movie called Pay It Forward. Anybody see that movie? Ah, good. The economy of blessing is as blessing does is the defining quality of life in God's church, from the first century in Galilee to our worship today. For the church that St. John wishes to become and seeks to become, recognizing, I hope, that it will never get there, cannot be a church of either or, meaning do this and you will be saved, but rather a gathering of the both and, a place for people who are both simultaneously saint and sinner, to borrow that wonderful phrase from Martin Luther. Over the past 2 Sundays, as Cammie and I begin to prepare to leave, I've tried to lay out for you a biblical picture of what church should be like, can be like. And first, it is as a sanctuary, where those in need of rescue and salvation are gathered in comfort through shared testimony of God's action in their lives. I've been there. Let me help you. And secondly, the church as a place where disciples are formed and called out to be Christ's presence in the world out there, outside these walls. As you continue to reflect, as you will over the coming weeks, on your congregational identity in this time of transition, know that the God to whom you belong intends you to be both a place that is open and affirming and accepting, and a place of shelter, and simultaneously a place of service to the community where you are planted. The two go hand in hand. The suggestion that I'm trying to offer this morning is that the be attitudes of Jesus are really revolutionary and transformative in the sense that they defy the conventional wisdom and common sense of our present culture. A culture that says, let's don't be too nice and too welcoming and too accepting because you don't know what those people might do to you. Living in fear. These 8 blessings do not direct us to do something so much as to recognize that these are the spiritual stamps that God has already granted us when we accept the same call to fellowship that the 4 fishermen did in last week's message. When we come to know that we are indeed blessed to be a blessing, then our relationship to God becomes one of complete trust that God is near, whatever the circumstance. We might still feel like sinners when we look in the mirror. Oh, God could never love somebody like me. But when the God of the Beatitudes sees us, he looks at us through the eyes of Jesus. A wholly different perspective. It's important, too, to remember that this dual nature of being blessed to be a blessing clearly implies that God relies on human agents, you and me, to be the heart, hands, and feet of divine benevolence. I don't know how many times you've heard me say it. You're probably tired of hearing me say it. But that we are nothing. We are nothing without God. And God is nothing without us. We're partners. We're called to be partners in the salvation of the world. When Jesus says, for instance, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, I don't think he's talking about people who are humble and timid and who have taken a vow of poverty. I like the way Eugene Peterson, the translator of the Message, expresses it. Hear this: you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. So God will bless those who have just had it, as well as those who offer help. And on any given day, you could be one or the other, sometimes even both on the same day. When Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, I don't think he's laying out an attribute to aspire to. Rather, if the poor in spirit are those who find no reason for hope in life, those who mourn are those who find no cause for joy. And again, Peterson expresses it so wonderfully. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one who is most dear to you. Clear implication is that God will act so that they need to mourn no more. Is there anyone who has not grieved? Is there anyone who has not been comforted in their sorrow? We are the holding, hugging, loving arms of God. God doesn't have any arms other than these. And you have a pair just like I do. When Jesus says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, it might seem as if being meek or timid is a synonym for poor in spirit or humble. But when you look at the early languages, it suggests that Jesus is talking about people who have been shamed and humiliated, or those who are oppressed or powerless, people for whom the gift of blessing is just going to have to wait a while, or they have been denied access to the world's resources and have not had an opportunity to enjoy creation as God intended. Eventually, the text assures us, they are going to receive what they had coming to them all along. But just remember this when you're tempted to deny someone seeking a handout. When you're, by the grace of a paycheck, it could be you that are forced to beg. Remember this when your fear leads you to close the door to a stranger. When Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled," it could be easy to look at this phrase as a promise of reward for just being good and living a virtuous life. But remember that righteousness and righteous is biblical code for justice, for doing what is right. The context can refer to God putting things right in the coming kingdom just as much as it can refer to the kingdom being brought closer when you overturn one unjust circumstance at a time, because you are in a position to act where no one else is. Similarly, I'm proud of myself. I can never say that word. Similarly, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy," the implication is what goes around comes around. The merciful are meant to be healers, people who seek to put right what has gone wrong. So in this case, the truly merciful would favor the removal of everything in their environment that prevents life from being as God intends. Removal of poverty and hunger and disease and indebtedness and even the state of being ostracized because of racial or ethnic or gender preference, prejudice, and identification. Peterson says simply, you're blessed when you care. And conversely, I suppose you could take that to mean you're not blessed when you don't care. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This one's a tricky one because you don't want to define the idea of heart too precisely, because people can lust in their heart as well as love with their heart. The Greek word that's used here, cardia, really represents more of the true self, the person you really are. You strip it all away, that's you. Pure in heart speaks to an attitude of integrity, or what I used to tell the teenage boys I counseled during my seminary training. They were in juvenile detention. Integrity is what you do when your mom is not around. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's what you do when there's no one to say, "Oh, boy, that was a nice thing you did," or how righteous you are. It's what you do because it's who you are. The implication is that purity of heart is not limited to inward expressions of piety or virtues, but rather purity of heart is an integrity that's just shown on behalf of others. Again to Peterson, you are blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart, put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. It starts in here. Finally, when Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God," we kind of need to look at that in conjunction with the remaining two blessings in this passage that says, those who are persecuted and ridiculed or reviled. That's who we're talking about. The thought is not so much peace as in the absence of conflict or in an atmosphere of calm and tranquility, but more peace is a spirit of reconciliation. People who work to bring about God's shalom are working for the wholeness and well-being that God wills for a broken world. The irony, the tightrope that we walk, is that those who practice the affirmative virtues on behalf of the less fortunate may find themselves one day somehow numbered among those who suffer. Can you think of who the supreme example of that would be? Jesus, who sought to proclaim justice to those who were deprived of it and ended up being deprived of justice himself when he was nailed to a tree. life in God's church, and living out the Beatitudes. To do that is to experience a paradox. Being in that tension between what will be and what is, between feelings of blessed neediness and imparting blessing to others. But however you describe it, however you characterize it, the promise of the Beatitudes is that something good will emerge from the dust of something not so good. When Jesus climbed up that mountainside to be with his disciples, to deliver the Sermon on the Mount, we're told that the crowds that were trailing in his wake were just he's talking to the 12, right? But there's a crowd all around the 12, and it's as if they're eavesdropping on what he's saying. And it suggests that Jesus knew that his words were not just to those he was sending immediately into the streets to continue his ministry, but they were intended for all to hear, even those of us today in the 21st century. So as you take all this in, I want to leave you with some questions. Where do you fit in this story? Where do you fit? Where does St. John fit? Where does St. John belong? When were you among those for whom things just weren't right? And when were you among those who made things right for others? When did you make something right for somebody else? How have you been blessed in your life today? Not yesterday, not last week, but since you got up this morning. And where and how have you brought blessings to another person in these past few hours? Where will you do that as the day unfolds? And what will be your state of blessedness tomorrow? I invite you to hear these questions in your heart as we prepare to sing our hymn of the day.